My husband's last request was simple. Don't climb the lighthouse at Blackthorn Lane. Promise me. I promised beside a beeping monitor and a clock that smiled like a liar. 3 months later, his lawyer slid me an envelope and a brass key shaped like a lantern tower. Jonah had bought Blackthorn Light back in secret. He told Mr. Patel to wait until I was ready. I wasn't. I went anyway. Fog peeled off the water as the ferry cut through Pewter Sea. At the dock, Ruth, keeper's daughter, keeper of promises, met me with a single nod. No speeches, just the tower, white and unyielding. The door opened with my key, up the iron spiral, into the lantern room. A work table, dozens of clear glass bottles, each with a tiny paper sail, each sail numbered in Jonah's handwriting. Day 1. A tag around the neck. Open me, then breathe. I pulled the cork. His voice on paper, calm, practical, unmistakable. If you're here, I left earlier than planned. I rebuilt this place to hold you when I can't. Some bottles have words, some have instructions. If the pikes come early, and they will, open day 3. The next morning, a black SUV rolled onto the dock, Money trying to look casual. His half-siblings brought a folder and a smile that wanted me to sign away the past. I didn't. I went back upstairs, found day 3, and did exactly what Jonah told me to. Because when someone tells you never to climb a lighthouse and then leaves you the key, you climb. Ruth met me at the small dock with a fisherman's patience and a wool cap pulled low. She was the retired postmaster and the daughter of Blackthorn's last official keeper, and she had hands that looked like they had agreed to help long before anyone asked. Her eyes took in my face and the key and the envelope, then rested on the tower as if on an old friend. "He made me promise not to say a word until you came," she said. "So I didn't. I don't break promises if I can help it." "Seems to be the theme," I said, and tried to smile. The first step onto the wooden planks felt like stepping into a cathedral you once believed in and weren't sure you could enter without bursting. The smell was salt and cold stone and something faintly sweet. Ruth walked beside me with the stride of someone who knows the rhythm of wet boards and wind. Inside, the lighthouse had the particular quiet that happens when thick walls keep out most of the world. The spiral stair coiled up like a question. I stood at its foot and put my hand on the iron rail. It was smooth with many hands. I told myself not to count the steps because grief makes superstitions out of ordinary things. At the lantern room, I turned the key in the old lock. I want to say the door sighed, but that would be too poetic for a door that had stood in storms. The door simply opened. Light poured onto the floor the way it does in chapels when stained glass throws color, except this light was clean and salt scrubbed. In the center of the room stood a wide wooden work table, and on it, arranged in 2 neat rows like soldiers or offerings, sat dozens of clear glass bottles with corks. Each bottle had a little paper sail affixed to a matchstick mast. On each tiny sail was a number in Jonah's hand, a number and a date. There are moments in grief when the world dips and tilts, and you think you will slide off the face of it. The bottle steadied the floor under my feet the way a hand on your back holds you when you climb a set of stairs you're not sure you can climb. The first bottle sail read, Day 1. A string was tied around its neck, and a small tag rested against the glass. Open me, then breathe. I pulled the cork carefully and slipped the folded paper out with tweezers Jonah had left beside a small coil of wire. My hands are not delicate by nature, but every movement became gentle. The paper smelt faintly of varnish and time. Jonah's words were, as always, specific. "Hi, love," the letter began. "If you're here, I left earlier than planned. I won't pretend I'm not angry about that. I was always better with tide tables than with calendars. I rebuilt this place because it is the one honest thing I could create with my hands that might hold you when my arms cannot. There is a bottle for each day you'll want me most, and for days you don't know yet you will want me. Some have words, some have more than words, some have instructions, some are just me being me. If the pikes come early, and they will, open bottle labeled Day 3, because I know my half-brother's sense of timing better than I know my own pulse. If you find yourself holding your breath, open any bottle and breathe with me on the page. I put the letter down and pressed my fingers to my lips. For a few seconds, the room doubled, then settled. I wanted to hate him for the secrecy, for making me speak to paper instead of skin. I wanted to praise him for knowing my steps before I took them. I did both. On a shelf below the table, a small plastic case sat tucked beneath a coil of rope. It was the size of a deck of cards, the kind you'd tuck in a pocket for luck, the kind Jonah always had. I opened it and found a tiny micro SD card taped to a square of index paper with the words, "For when your patience is thinner than my hair," written in Jonah's hand. There was a small voice recorder beside it, simple and rugged, the brand he favored. He had only used a computer for work, mistrusting screens that glowed for no reason. I looked out across the bay and saw the mainland yards away and the world I had been inhabiting just there, so close, as if I could reach out and pluck the grocery store from where it sat and set it on the catwalk to consider it anew. The bottles sat in their rows, waiting like small lungs. Downstairs, the ground floor had been made into a workshop, clean in the way a space is when the person using it respects the tools more than the noise they make. Ship and bottle instruments lined a pegboard, each with a stencil outline so it always went back where it belonged. An array of nautical clocks hung on the wall, brass and glass, all set to the same time, 3:17. There were photos of boats and a faded postcard of a lighthouse at dawn. A large nautical chart lay on the table under a sheet of clear plastic, the kind of chart no one uses anymore, paper with ink that smelled like better days. A red corridor had been marked on it in Jonah's hand, a shaded line running from a point offshore to a cove at Blackthorn, with a note in the margin, "Ideal approach if cables insist on pretending to be whales." A low drawer had been labeled "Not Yet," the letters inked cleanly in a straight hand. I slid it open a few inches and then pushed it closed, because the drawer had asked politely. Ruth stood in the doorway. "She said to tell you that old places have long memories. He said if you were angry, that would mean you were still here, which is good. People who aren't angry anymore usually drive inland." "Is that what you do when you stop being angry? Drive inland?" She said, "You moved to Florida," with a smile that had weathered sarcasm before. Her face softened. "He used to sit here with those clocks, said they were easier than people, said time never pretended to be something it wasn't." I went back up to the lantern room and opened the second bottle. The letter inside was shorter. "Remember the first time we took the ferry? You fell asleep sitting up with your head against the window. I pretended I wasn't watching you. The man across from us was eating Cheez-Its like communion. I wanted to ask you to marry me then, but I didn't have a ring and your hair smelled like lemon shampoo and I was afraid I'd make it ordinary by saying it. We keep making the extraordinary ordinary, and then Narnia appears in a closet when we need it. The lighthouse is a closet with a country in it. Don't fight the metaphor. It's all I've got today." The third bottle I did not open. Not yet, though it made my fingers itch. I told myself I had free will. I told myself that the universe sometimes made suggestions. I went outside, stood on the catwalk, and felt the wind take my edges and turn them into something less rigid. The black SUV on the dock arrived a day later with the sound of money trying to be casual. Two people stepped out. A man whose smile invited you to hand him your worries so he could put them down on a tray and move them somewhere you couldn't see. And a woman whose coat fit her like a decision. Grant and Lila Pike, my husband's half-siblings, had the bone structure of the Whitaker line and the curiously insincere common courtesy of people who practice manners so they won't need character. The sheriff came too, Dan Halsey, who had been prom king in 1998 and had the decency to be more interesting now. He tipped his hat at Ruth, a gesture that looked less like a movie and more like mutual respect. He switched his weight from heel to toe while he read the paper Lila handed him, as if he hated what he was about to have to say. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "there's been a filing. It's a petition to inspect, given contested inheritance. I do not have a court order. I can't force you to do anything. I am obligated to bring this to your attention. The Pikes have—" He paused, always polite, expressed concern about the upkeep of a historic structure. They say they are family and have an interest. "I have an interest, too," I said, and my voice sounded like my mother's when she told visiting church ladies they had had enough pie. I showed him the papers Mr. Patel had given me: Jonah's ownership through the Heritage LLC, the quitclaim deed, the insurance, the inspection documents Ruth had facilitated with the state officer 6 months earlier. Dan read them and handed them back, and exhaled once, like a man who had been braced for a different outcome and was relieved. Lila held a folder like a weapon that had to be admired. She said, "We are not here to make trouble. We're here to make sure our brother's memory is honored and that fragile coastal infrastructure is cared for. A shared approach is best." "Jonah's memory is being honored," I said, and watched Grant's smile tighten a fraction. He stepped forward as if to offer a communion of a different kind. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said in a voice he had practiced on stages of benefit galas. "Lighthouses are expensive. Lighthouses are liabilities. Lighthouses are stories that get you sued. Sell it to the foundation and let us steward it for the family. We'll set your daughter up. It's what Jonah would have wanted. We all want the same thing. We want peace." Peace is often the word people use when they mean surrender, I said, and handed him nothing. They left a letter anyway, with embossed letterhead and a number that had more zeros and birthdays between us. The number didn't tempt me. The condescension did. I went back up the stairs, sat at the table, and opened the bottle marked Day 3. "Low tide," the paper said, after a paragraph about breakfast at a diner where the pancakes had been served with butter shaped like seashells. "Low tide. If the Pikes beat the wind to your door, go at low tide. Take Ruth, don't take Maya. Bring a flashlight and a stubbornness. There's a hatch. It looks like part of the rock. That's because it is part of the rock. I put a new latch on the inside because the old one could be opened by a curious seal. Don't laugh. They are smarter than us, and they don't want the cable either." Ruth had been waiting for me to get to that bottle. "Your husband liked to keep the real valuables where the wind could argue with him about it," she said, collecting a pair of gloves and a bag that had seen more salt than bread. The tide was pulling away from the rock with the sigh of a mother who has finally gotten the baby to sleep. We went down the catwalk to where the iron stairs met the scramble of boulders, and there, tucked against a seam in the stone, was a heavy square of steel flush with the granite, painted the gray of understatement. Inside, a short ladder led to a chamber that smelled like damp ambition. The walls were poured concrete lined with shelves. The place looked like someone had tried to make a submarine office. A work table with a map light on a swing arm held a stack of hard drives taped with dates, a pelican case with Jonah's initials burned into its lid, and a ledger bound in blue canvas with a ribbon bookmarking the current page. There were labels on the bins in Jonah's hand: Survey, Public Records, Pike Foundation, Ocean Span, Not Today, 4-Lane. We opened the pelican case first. Inside were a small drone and a set of memory cards. Ruth booted up a little rugged laptop and slotted a card like she had set up the VCR for her father the year that town refused to buy him new channels. I watched the video appear, the drone running a grid over the marsh west of the lighthouse. Brightly colored flags dotted the screen, each marked with a number and a letter. The overlay labels were crisp: Phase 2 Alternate Landing Corridor, Easement contingent on Blackthorn Heritage cooperation. Screenshots of emails followed, redacted names of consultants, subject lines like, "If Blackthorn refuses, we're sunk," and "Do not reveal extent of Phase 2 until final acquisition." My stomach tightened and then settled into a new certainty. It is strange the relief that comes when you realize that the unease you have been gaslighting in yourself is actually the shape of the truth. The ledger contained neat entries with arrows in the margins and small comments that let me hear Jonah's low laugh. Grants from the Pike Foundation to shell organizations that shared an address with a private office downtown. Payments categorized as coastal resilience that landed in accounts with no coastline and spent funds on consulting fees that mapped neatly onto the timing of filings to the county board. In the simplest terms, the ledger told a story of influence for sale, disguised as help. It also told me Jonah had known it would come to this table. He had left me a bottle labeled Day 10, Tell Maya the Truth, and I wasn't yet at Day 10, but rules in grief are guidelines you change if the weather demands it. I put the note in my pocket and called my daughter. Maya had Jonah eyes and my forehead and a smile that could make a dog sit down. She had been living in Portland with 2 roommates and a plant she talked to more often than she called me. When she walked into the coffee shop the next afternoon, she moved fast the way she always did, momentum as a language. She hugged me and smelled like rosemary and printer ink. And then she sat and put her phone on the table like a referee. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Me too. You first. Your aunt and uncle." "Half aunt and half uncle," she said without thinking, and then looked guilty. "Sorry. They came to find me, or I let them find me. It's the same thing. They had photo albums, Mom. They had stories about Dad when he was a teenager. They had a picture of him in front of the lighthouse with a haircut he should have apologized for. They said they felt awful about how we were blindsided. They said they wanted to help." What did they want? They said they wanted to make things right. They said they knew you were out of your depth. She swallowed. I told them, I don't know what depth is anymore. I set the coffee down and took out Jonah's recorder. I hadn't planned to play it in public, but Maya had never waited until the right place to ask the hard question. I pressed play and heard my husband's voice fill the small space between the whir of the espresso machine and the clink of 2 cups. You can love a voice and hate it at the same time when it reminds you what you have lost and what you still know. "Mouse," he began, using the nickname we had given her when she was 5, and had announced that if anyone insisted on calling her sweetheart again, she would move to a tree. "If you're listening, it means your mother is braver than I am about being honest. It means I trusted paper and plastic to carry what I should have held in my hands. I should have told you I was sick. I should have let you sit on the end of the bed and ask me questions I didn't want to answer. I made a selfish choice. I wanted the last years to be ordinary. There is so much ordinary I miss with a hunger I didn't know a body could have. I am asking you to forgive me, and I do not deserve it yet." He paused, and I could see him in the Lighthouse workshop, his fingers tapping a quiet rhythm on the table. "There is something else. My half-siblings were thieves long before they found religion and philanthropy. They took my share of what my mother left me when I was 19. They filed papers with my name on them while I was at school. When I threatened to report it, they threatened to make it look like I was complicit. I left instead. I took my grief, and I found another coastline, and I found your mother. And I built a life that made the first one look like a bad rehearsal. I did not forgive them. I did not take their calls. What they are offering you now is not family. It is procurement. They are very good at making procurement look like love." Maya cried without moving, tears sliding down like a private rain. She wiped them with her sleeve and nodded once, a small movement that looked like a wing folding. She said, "They offered to pay my loans. They said we could be a family again." I said, "They offered to rent your loyalty. It is not the same thing. It rarely is. I have something else to show you." I slid the printouts across the table, the ledger entries, The drone screenshots, the map with red corridors. She read quickly, her hand moving over the page as if she could feel the text, her jaw set in a line I recognized from 1,000 previous arguments we had had when she was 12 and wanted a phone, and I was mean and invoked the idea of safety. "So, we're prey?" I said, "We are partners," and felt something in my chest stop floating and land. For 3 days, I didn't sleep well, and I slept better than I had in months. The way fear and purpose can exist in the same body is a paradox I learned much later than I should have. I took the ledger to Mr. Patel and watched his eyebrows perform an eloquent soliloquy. I called Sonia Park, the State Historic Preservation Officer, a woman with a tired laugh and a gift for telling you a hard truth in a way that made you feel like you could carry it. I sent a careful, respectful email to a man at Oceanspan Networks named Victor Lang, whose biography online featured marathons and a careful part about community partnerships. I wrote that I was the owner of a heritage lighthouse at Thorns Rock, that we were not opposed to progress, that progress had to answer to the ground under it. I wrote that my husband had reconstructed a safety net for the place that would deserve no money, only the right care. I suggested a conversation. At night, I sat in the lantern room with the bottles and opened one a day, except when I opened two because I was greedy for him. One letter was only a memory about the time we got lost in downtown Providence and bought falafel from a truck driven by a man who sang Sinatra. We ate on the curb. Your knees were dirty. You looked like a kid and a queen, and I want to say I chose you then, but I kept choosing you every day, especially on the days you made fun of my socks. One letter was an apology for hiding the Lighthouse purchase, written with a clarity he had not often mustered when he was alive, because he believed, as many of us do, that honesty will cause the people we love to leave before we are ready. He wrote, "I bought it back because I couldn't stand the thought of a glass and steel landing station without a heart beating beside it to remind the future it belongs to something." In the workshop, on the wall beside the clocks, Jonah had pinned a small photograph of a kid with bad hair holding a ship and bottle. The kid was him. He stared at the camera like he could see the man behind it and wanted to warn him about something. Under the picture, Jonah had written, "Don't grow up, grow towards." When Oceanspan replied, they did so with courtesy that felt like a table being set for a meal I hadn't realized I could cook. Mr. Lang offered to meet on site, which was either confidence or hubris. I told him to come, and I told him who else would be there. I invited Sonia, who said she would be at my table if she had to kayak. I told Sheriff Halsey that he could bring his patients. I told Grant and Lila because it seemed only fair to let them find it out in my house. I told Ruth because she made better coffee than anyone in the county, and because people like her have a way of making rooms behave. The day they came, the sky was a blue that tourists think happens every day. The sea was a map of small diamonds. The ferry brought Victor in a navy jacket and a watch that looked like it had been earned. He shook my hand like he meant it and did not call me Mrs. Jonah. The Pikes arrived in their SUV with a lawyer whose chin could open envelopes. Sheriff Halsey wore his uniform, which looked like a promise when he stood beside the window and said nothing. I had laid out the dining room in the keeper's house with a long table, water glasses set on coaster rings Joyce O'Connell had crocheted in 1974, papers stacked beside each name card, a projector perched in the center like a patient animal. Maya stood by it like a stagehand ready to pull ropes at the cue. There is a power in turning your grief into a plan. There is an even bigger power in letting people see you have done so. Grant began as I had known he would. "Elaine, forgive me if I'm familiar," he said, as if he had been given permission to use my first name. "We realize you've been through a lot. We want to honor Jonah in a way that does not saddle you with a liability. We have a foundation that can preserve this landmark for future generations. We have relationships with the right people." He glanced at Victor as if the word relationships were a suggestion rather than a confession.
We understand OceanSpan's needs. We can facilitate a clean sale, and we can ensure the family remains part of Blackthorn's future in a way that respects everyone. Relationships are lovely, I said. I have one with my daughter. I have one with this building. I have one with the law. I suggest we use those. Victor leaned forward, his elbows on the table. He said, "We are not here to strong-arm anyone." His voice was even, like a level placed properly on a board. "We are here because, frankly, the Bay is a better place to bring cables ashore than the alternatives. We can bring good jobs, fund training programs, and do it with minimal disruption. But we need to do it right. The company has learned a little about doing things wrong. You can Google us. We have no interest in being the villain in a town that makes postcards. The question is whether we can find a way to be necessary without being obnoxious." Maya clicked the projector, and the map appeared. The coast outlined as if someone had traced the inside of a hand. The Phase 2 corridor overlay slid into place like someone was drawing it in real time. The red line showed the only viable landing under certain constraints that OceanSpan had not made public because secrecy was currency. I did not betray sources. I did not need to. The geometry of places tells the truth if you let it. I said, "The Western Marsh," and pointed to the shaded area. "Your consultants have labeled it undevelopable. That's a convenient word. What you mean is unprofitable in the short term. It is, however, the only section that preserves the line of sight you require to avoid an astronomical cost curve and a storm of regulatory scrutiny. I don't need to prove what we already know. I just need to say out loud what you have been saying quietly."
Victor nodded, not as a concession, but as an act of respect. The room shifted. People in rooms often shift before they speak in order to signal to themselves whether they are about to lie. Lila's eyes narrowed at the map. Her fingers tightened around the folder. She saw something slipping. "I am not selling the Lighthouse to the Pike Foundation," I said. I said it the way you say "I do," as if there were a man with a book and an audience waiting for you to speak the one syllable that will change your name. I am not splitting its dignity into thirds like a pie. I am willing to talk to OceanSpan. I am willing to talk to the state. I am willing to talk to my conscience. But this place does not belong to you. It belongs to the future that knows how to listen. Ruth stepped forward and handed out the envelopes I had sealed the night before with the small satisfaction of a person who has finally learned to use those wax kits they sell at stationery stores. The habit of paper is older than electricity. Inside, each envelope contained excerpts from the ledger, the grants, the shell addresses, the email soliciting advocacy in exchange for silent favors, and a draft of a press release that Lila had drafted on the letterhead of a firm in Boston, framing me as an unstable widow clinging to a dangerous structure. Victor read quickly. His face did not change much, but his jaw did something. Sonia read more slowly with the careful attention people in her job have to texts that bring other texts into being. The sheriff's eyebrows rose in their own semaphore. Grant looked like he had been handed a snake and told it was a ribbon, then watched it writhe. "You will keep your allegations to yourself," Lila said, the professional charm burning off. "You will not print defamatory material. You have no idea how quickly this can go poorly for you." "I have some idea. I have a teacher's salary. I know about quickly and poorly. What I also have are eyes, and a community that can tell the difference between a grant and a bribe once they stop being flattered. OceanSpan will make their own decision about whom they want to be seen with, but if you stand next to me in a photograph, people will ask why they can smell gasoline." Victor looked at me for a long moment, and then he nodded. "Mrs. Whitaker, subject to board approval, OceanSpan accepts the framework you proposed in your email with edits to be made by counsel that do not change its meaning.
We will abide by strict environmental protections as set by the state. We will fund a training center on the mainland that prepares local kids for jobs other than scraping by or leaving. We will establish a revenue share into a rescue and preservation fund for maritime emergencies along the coast. We will open a small history room at Blackthorn and maintain access to the catwalk on summer days with a docent if you and Miss Park permit. We will work under the dual designation that the state fast-tracks. We will not work with the Pike entities on this project in any capacity. Sonia cleared her throat, a sound of someone who doesn't enjoy being an instrument and is willing to be one anyway. If the community fund is codified, she said, and if the history room is more than an Instagram, and if access does not endanger anyone, the state will move quickly. Some things deserve speed, not many. This does. Lila opened her mouth and closed it. Grant's smile fell off his face and landed somewhere he would have to bend to pick it up. He did not bend. He held himself with the posture of a man who has always assumed gravity will exempt him. The sheriff collected his hat from the chair and put it on, because sometimes ritual is all you have. After the meeting, the house exhaled. People said words to me like courage and impressive and lucky, and every one of those words felt imprecise. There was nothing impressive about a widow exhausted by names and numbers saying no on principle. There was a great deal of luck in the way the drone footage had been captured the morning the fog lifted for exactly 2 hours. There was courage in Ruth refilling the coffee pot and keeping the room human.
In the days that followed, the Pikes retreated to the mainland to send emails with subject lines like reconsideration and to hire a PR firm that looked like a hive. Ocean Span's lawyers sent drafts that were both generous and careful, a combination I had started to believe did not exist. We drove to the state office and sat at a table longer than my kitchen with people whose nameplates reflected the fluorescent lights and agreed on clauses that would thread a cable through a history without tearing it. I stopped waking up at 3 a.m. every night and instead woke up at 4:30 and made tea and stood at the window and watched the sky change. Jonah's bottles dwindled the way a candle does, thicker at first and then suddenly thin. There was one labeled Day 30, When You Paint Again. My worst secret was that I had once written songs and recorded them in our living room with a microphone that had never been kind to my voice. When I married Jonah, I put the guitar under the bed the way you tuck a childish thing away when you have to take yourself seriously. In the shoebox Jonah left in a closet, I found those old CDs, my own voice singing to no one in particular, and a note from him. Sing again, Lane. Not for money, for oxygen. I did not sing that night, but I hummed. I hummed in the stairwell where the notes became small birds. I hummed in the kitchen where the notes became smoke. I hummed while I signed my name on a contract that made a heritage site into a partner. The humming became words, quietly at first, then with more certainty. Songs do not solve grief. They make grief rhythmic enough to carry. Maya and I built a new routine. She moved back home for a while and slept in her old room with the poster of a band she had pretended to love for a boy. We cooked cheap meals like we had when she was younger, and we laughed when I burned the grilled cheese because grief makes you forget which side of the bread likes the heat. We fought about her laundry, and then made up without the old speed. She learned the names of the shorebirds from Ruth, who taught her how to find the knots in a rope and draw them out with patience and a spoon. Visitors started to come even before the history room was ready. People want to stand where weather lives. They want to bring their children up a spiral and tell them something will be okay. They want to stand on a catwalk and hold on to a rail and feel smaller on purpose for once, so the bigness of their own lives can stop pretending it is the only scale. Ruth gave tours with a voice like sandpaper that had been sanded. She did not tell them about the cachet beneath the rocks.
She talked about her father's hands and the night he rowed a dory out in the gale because a man in a lobster boat thought he could race the storm and lost. She talked about the Fresnel lens like it was a marriage, about the way glass breaks if you don't respect it, about the way light chooses you when you don't choose it. The sheriff stopped by with donuts once and stood at the bottom of the stairs. I say this as a man who thought he knew who he was because he wore the same badge for 20 years, he said. You're not the person I thought you were when I watched you walk into the grocery store 2 months ago like a ghost was carrying your cart. You're the person who set a table and fed us better than pie. Grant came once too, months later, without Lila, without a lawyer. He stood on the porch and asked if he could speak with me. I let him stand outside because I have learned that boundaries can be polite and still be called boundaries. I've been ill, he said, not as a tactic, but as a fact. His jaw was thinner. His eyes did not try to sell me anything. I did not expect you to win. I am here to say I am glad you did. I found a picture in our father's things. It shows Jonah holding a shipping bottle with a barrette in his hair from a girlfriend he loved for a week. He was a better person than me. He deserved better brothers. I took the photograph and held it like a piece of sea glass that had been thrown back on shore. We will put this in the history room, I said. You can come see it there. You can come as long as you remember. You are a visitor like everyone else. He nodded. His shoulders lowered a fraction. For a second, we stood in a space where our shared blood was the least important thing between us. He left without shaking my hand because he hadn't the grace to know he hadn't earned it. When the Blackthorn History Room opened, a third-grade class from the mainland was the first to climb the stairs. Their teacher was a woman with sensible hair and a smile that could stop a fight between twins. I stood in the corner and watched the children look up, the way children do when they see something they can tell is older than their grandparents. Ruth pointed to the shelf with the bottles. We'd chosen a handful to display as part of the story, the ones that said nothing private, the ones that offered a general benediction. A boy with a cowlick pressed his nose to the glass and read a line out loud he did not understand. Legacy is not stone or steel. It is the permission we give each other to be more. He repeated it slower, as if saying it would make it make sense. Maybe it did. Ocean's Bend built a training center and a warehouse on the waterfront that had sat vacant long enough to smell like abandonment. They painted the walls a blue that made you think of the possibility of air. They installed workbenches and microscopes and rows of fiber that looked like threads and acted like veins. A kid named Jess, who almost dropped out of school because he thought he'd never use algebra, figured out he could weld like a savant. A girl named Avery, who had been told she was good with people and should therefore go into hospitality, became a cable splicing artist who could talk to anyone and didn't have to carry plates when her back hurt. Maya volunteered to run a small seminar on resume writing and then applied for a job she would never have considered and got it. The training center paid above minimum wage and let people go home to cook dinner for their kids. The marsh stayed marsh. The birds did not leave. The cable came ashore where it was supposed to, under concrete and patience, with the respect for weather that you can't buy from a consultant. The dual designation framed the lighthouse as a thing that could be both useful and sacred. The trick, as it turns out, is not to confuse the two. In the contract, Oceanspan agreed to an emergency fund that paid for a new rescue boat after a nor'easter snapped the old one's mooring like dental floss. They agreed to maintain the stairs and the railing with hardware 100 years from now would appreciate. They agreed to be seen when seen was appropriate and to stay out of photographs when what mattered was the family whose ashes scattered in the wind in a small ceremony Ruth conducted twice a year for people who could not afford a funeral home.
On the day I opened Jonah's last bottle, I did it alone in the lantern room with the windows cracked so the summer air could pretend to be an ocean indoors. I turned the little cork between my fingers and thought of his thumbs on my knuckles. The paper slid out the way a bird leaves a nest when it knows how. I unfolded the page. The handwriting had the confidence he always faked in his first lines when he began a letter, and then forgot to fake by the third paragraph when he found his voice.
This is the end of the bottles, he wrote, not the end of anything. An object lesson, glass will hold a message only as long as the hand that wrote it understands it is writing for a future it will not see. You have made it up the stairs many times now. You have looked out and seen the water refuse to explain itself. You have learned to let it be unsolved without letting it be unguarded. I do not have anything wise left to say, which is a relief. You always preferred me when I spoke plainly. I built this place to catch you. You do not need it to catch you anymore. If you keep a bottle sealed, let it be because you want to stop hearing my voice and start listening for your own when the wind hits the glass. If you keep any of the clocks set at 3:17, let it be because you like the joke, not because you think time stopped. Take care of Ruth and of the kids who will come up these stairs and be told stories about fog and brass. Take care of Maya. Take care of yourself. Sing at least one song a week to no one but the sea. If you can, forgive me the secrecy. I did what I did because love sometimes confuses itself with protection. Kiss the railing for me, in the place where the paint bubbled and we pretended we didn't care. I press my mouth to my fingers and then to the rail like a devout woman kissing a relic. The paint tasted like dust and salt and a man whose laugh still lived in the corners of this room. I cried the way I had not cried since the day I read his name in the obituary, not in heaves, but in the slow ribbon of a river. When I was done, I folded the paper small and placed it back inside the bottle and did not recork it. It lay open on the table, and for once I did not worry about humidity. In the evenings now, when the ferry horn blows and Noah waves from the wheelhouse and Ruth locks the door with a click that sounds like a tradition, I sit on the porch of the keeper's house with a mug that has a chip on its lip and watch the last light make a road on the water. The wind moves through the grasses like a hand smoothing a sheet. Sometimes Maya sits beside me and tells me about a kid at the training center who reminded her of herself at 17. Sometimes I strum my old guitar and let my fingers find chords that were waiting for me like a pair of boots you finally put on because the weather insisted. People ask me what legacy means, the way children ask about God, usually with their heads tilted as if the answer might fall from the ceiling. I tell them legacy is not a noun, it is a verb with an object and a purpose. We legacy each other into the people we cannot become alone. Jonah legacied me the permission to climb after he asked me not to. I legacied Maya the permission to say no, even to family if family is a costume for hunger. Ruth legacied a generation of kids the stories that keep them from thinking they are the first ones to be brave. Ocean Span, to their credit, learned to legacy a town the respect it deserved. Near Thanksgiving, when the sky turns the color of iron and the wind develops teeth, we host a small gathering for the people who did not leave. Ruth makes chowder in a pot her father used on nights he would get called out to help a boat that thought it could outrun physics. The sheriff brings a pie someone else baked. Sonia comes with a carton of eggnog and a story about a grant for a stone church 3 counties over. Victor arrives without fanfare and stands at the edge of the porch holding a cup of coffee like he's still pretending it's just a cup of coffee and not a symbol of a truce. We don't make speeches. We stand and listen to the sea rearrange itself. Some nights, I climb the stairs after everyone is asleep and sit with the lanterns off and let the dark be what it is. I can hear the glass creak when the temperature drops. I can hear the rope in the flagpole tap against the metal with the rhythm of a heart that refuses to slow down just because a person thinks it should. I hum. I say goodnight to a room that taught me you can hold the dead and the living in the same hand if you learn to open your fingers.
Once, early on, when I was still learning how to be a person who did not wake up and immediately make a list of reasons to go back to bed, I found a note Jonah had tucked where no bottle could go. It was under the workbench, taped to the bottom, like a kid hiding a comic book from a boring teacher. It read, "If you are reading this, you have become nosy in a way I adore. Don't be afraid of what you do well, even if what you do well is snoop. Also, there's a spare flashlight behind the clock with the scratch on its face." I turned the clock and found the flashlight and laughed in the quiet, a sound that surprised me with its ease. A laugh is a promise kept. I went back upstairs and opened a window and let the night take it. I keep the brass key with the lighthouse silhouette on a ring with the house keys and the car key and the tiny plastic discount tag for the grocery store. It clinks against them and gives them a dignity they didn't know they needed. Some mornings, when the coffee maker gurgles and the foghorns moan, I tuck the key into my pocket and walk down the path past the blueberry bushes that Ruth tends with the patience of a person who knows you can't hurry fruit. I unlock the door, touch the rail, climb the stairs, and read a bottle, even though the bottles are gone. What lives in a room after the bottles are gone is the truth that someone loved you enough to design a future where you are brave on purpose. Standing on the catwalk now, I look toward the mainland and wonder at all the places you can see clearly when you rise just high enough to love them properly. I do not ask why he asked me not to climb. I do not assume I have solved him. People are not codes that yield when you have the right key. People are tides. You stand in them and you learn to step with their pull. Jonah's last request was simple. My answer is longer. It sounds like wind hitting glass and the hum of a note finding a place to rest. It sounds like my daughter laughing inside the house, and Ruth banging a pan on the stove, and a gull being rude. It sounds like a life. It sounds like a light.